Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be wrapping up our Sea-Dog model analysis of gaming disorders, where we talk about different types of escapism within gamers. And today we'll be talking about the final stage of escapism, which is dissociation. Before we get into dissociation, I want to just give a quick recap of what we covered in the last two videos, which is basically active escapism and regular escapism. Now, those of you that are unfamiliar, I'm going to leave both videos up on the title card on the top right so you guys can have a look if you want to get caught up. But basically, active escapism is where you go out of your way to try and compensate for something that you're lacking in real life. Whereas escapism is being beaten down and frustrated by what's happening in real life, and you start avoiding it instead. That's basically a generic overview. You can obviously watch the videos if you want more context into that. Today we will be discussing the final stage of escapism, which is dissociation. Now, dissociation is loosely defined in the study as the process of switching off your physical environment to preserve your mental faculty. It's a bit rare to get to the dissociated state of mind where you have to do this, but it's generally when the physical world and real life becomes so painful for you to interact with that your brain automatically starts shutting off, and you start having an almost out-of-body experience where your brain detaches you from your sense of self in order to preserve your mental faculty and even your sanity, because of how much perpetual pain you've been absorbing throughout your life, but especially in the moment. So an example of this is when a guy who's not having a lot of success with women or something, and he's gotten past the point of frustration where before he was avoiding women, but now it's gotten to the point where it's painful because he's being rejected. It's almost like life itself is rejecting him. He splits himself into two, and one, it almost exists as like a husk in real life where it's just like a shell of a man and he's not doing much. He's just a social reject. He's not interfacing with anybody, especially people of the opposite sexes, in any sort of way. And the other side of him is like he's playing video games where there's a lot of sexually explicit content, and he's like this charismatic Casanova, and he just goes around betting a lot of women. In order to escape the pain of rejection, he sort of takes himself out of the game altogether and lives a new life where he has everything he wants, and he uses that as a coping mechanism in order to get what he wants, because he's unable to do that in the real world anymore. Now, keep in mind, this is the most extreme case of escapism, and thankfully it's very rare. Now, it's important to understand the three stages here. Whereas active escapism comes from compensation out of dissatisfaction, and whereas escapism comes from avoidance due to frustration. Dissociation comes from preservation due to denial. It's important to understand that dissociation, at the end of the day, is simply a mechanism of self-preservation enacted by the brain in order to keep you safe. It's to the point where these repeated acts of denial threaten to shatter your sense of self-esteem or sense of identity, even, that your brain has to sort of clock into overdrive in order to eject you out of the pilot seat and save you from almost yourself. This can be quite challenging, and there's a couple of strategies we can discuss in terms of like alleviating these sort of symptoms, but I want to make it very clear that if your son or anyone that you know is suffering from dissociation, it is very, very, very advised that you seek professional medical help eventually, because whereas escapism, we can talk about treatment options, and while there is a do-it-yourself sort of manual for those, dissociation is quite serious, and I would highly recommend you talk to a medical professional as soon as possible. Now, what are the treatment options for people with dissociation? I have two that I came up with. Bear in mind, this is something that you can do in the short to midterm, but eventually you will have to get medical attention. And the first one is actually yoga. So yoga, or Tai Chi, increases the sense of self, and it allows you to be more present with yourself. There is a part of your brain called the insula, which is the part that signals to your brain that you yourself exist. It's sort of the part that tells you that you are alive and you are existing within the space-time continuum of this reality, right? And it's been shown that compared to like regular people that meditate have highly developed and bigger insulas. While I thought of meditation as an option, I think yoga is a better alternative simply because of the physical component to it. Meditation, while very nice, obviously, and you should probably get your son to do it, it's more of like a still sort of like a mental exercise, whereas yoga, there's a physical component, and it allows you to sort of feel your body move through space and establish a closer kinetic connection to moving your limbs, and it can allow for someone that is experiencing dissociation to sort of focus in their sense of self and achieve a sense of presence, because at the end of the day, dissociation is a lack of presence in their regular self because they're too busy trying to run away from the physical world and they eventually go into gaming. But it's all about bringing them back into the fold of the real world, and yoga can help a lot with that. Another part of this is actually less technology. Now, I know you heard this advice before, but the reason why I'm proposing less technology as an option for people that dissociate a lot is because technology, in a way, allows us to fragment ourselves into smaller pieces, and those smaller pieces enact with pieces of software, right? And this is the same for gaming, obviously, whereas it's not you holistically that's participating in gaming. It's a small part of you, or maybe a not so small part of you, but it's still not the whole part of you. It's usually repressed desires, it's usually escapisms, it's usually something you could have gotten in the real world, but you're getting through gaming instead. And in times like this, it's important to turn down the dial in terms of technology usage, because you don't want this to become a compulsory habit. When people dissociate, they become more willing to experiment in the virtual realm, and they do this by cutting off their physical world entirely. This is where it can become problematic, where you'd rather live your life out in the virtual world, and because the pain of living in the physical world is too much for you to bear. And this is obviously a much more long-term process, and there's a lot of little tips and tricks that you can use along with this, but in the general sense, you want to turn down the dial on technology slowly over time, so you can allow them to reintegrate into real life and experience the joys of real life and get more and more accustomed to it, rather than having to split themselves apart and use gaming as a conduit and as a proxy for real life. Obviously, there's a lot of complicated steps that go into this, guys, so if you guys want more help regarding how to treat people with escapism, or if your son themselves are struggling with escapism and you want a more personalized outlook on someone that was struggling from video game addiction, you guys can use the links below to enlist for my coaching program, where we can discuss your personal circumstances and help deliver a solution that is right for you. Other than that, thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.